This chapter is all about authorization. And if you'll remember, authorization is how we determine if a principal has access to a resource. Up until this point, we've been focusing primarily on authentication. So with authentication, we validate the user's identity, and then we can retrieve some information about the user's authorities, or their accesses within our system. And using that information, we bounce it against authorization roles or access roles, and then we can determine the resources a particular principal has access to. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to make those choices about whether or not to grant a user access to a resource. So let's take a look at some of our chapter objectives. Throughout our work, we have seen how we can restrict some access to resources, and we've really been at that page level. Well, that's not always appropriate for an application, and we need to push our authorization decisions down into actually components on the page at that level and at the method invocation level. So that's what we're going to look at within this chapter, is how we make more granular decisions about access to a resource. To do that, we're going to leverage the Spring Expression Language, or SPELL. While SPELL is not itself a mechanism for making authorization decisions, it is used by the other mechanisms such as annotations that we're going to see within this chapter. So it's important we have a good understanding of this expression language. The primary thing to know about the expression language is that it has access to some of the objects within our security context holder. So we can access the principal, we can access the authentication object within the expressions that we create to make authorization decisions. Throughout the chapter, we will run through some demonstrations that show how we can use the authorized tag within the Spring Security JSP tag library in order to conditionally render sections of a page. The neat thing about the authorized tag is there are several methods of making that authorization decision, and we'll go through each of those methods so we have that familiarity and we know when to use which approach. One of my most favorite parts of Spring Security is the ability to apply authorization to method invocations. This is very powerful. We're able to look at information about our user and then decide whether or not they can invoke a method. So this applies to all of our Spring beans, and it's a very powerful feature because it grants us very fine-grained control about what a user can and cannot do. So we're going to be exposed to 3 annotations that will allow us to make those types of decisions. That's the pre-authorized annotation, the post-authorized annotation, and then the standards compliant roles allowed annotation, which functions very similarly to the pre-authorized annotation. Another neat feature that we'll take a look at is the ability to filter a collection using annotations. So we're able to use the pre-filter and post-filter annotations to filter collections that are accepted as arguments to our methods or that are returned as objects from our methods. And this allows us to fine-tune a collection to the logged in or authenticated user. And this can be used primarily as a check to ensure that a user is not getting access beyond what they should have the appropriate permissions for. So this is a very important chapter because we're learning how to take the authenticated user and begin to make security decisions about what they can and cannot do within our application. I look forward to working through some of the examples because I feel this chapter really ties everything together. So let's get started.